I know that we're still getting some people back in from lunch, but in the interest of staying on time, I know we're all here to learn from each other, and that's what we're going to do during the next 45 minutes. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ken Shilson. I'm president of the National Alliance of Buy Here, Pay Here Dealers, but it's a real pleasure to be here at NIADA this year, and it's a particular pleasure to be moderating for the next 45 minutes this panel, because we've got some great operators up here who are going to share some of their best practices. But a couple of things. First, we know we've got some great operators out there, and we want you to feel free to give us your comments as we go through and discuss some of these practices today. We're always interested in hearing what you're doing and how you're doing it, and we'll all be better by sharing those things. Just two things that I wanted to touch on prior to introducing these panelists. First, NABD and NIADA announced just a few weeks ago that we will launch a Buy Here, Pay Here Master Dealer Certification Program. I know you're familiar with the Master Dealer Certification Retail Program, which NIADA has done very successfully over the last 4 years, and we think we can draw from their expertise in putting on the certification program, and we will add the Buy Here, Pay Here touch or flavor to it that we've learned over the last 14 years at NABD. And I want to say that I would encourage all of you to consider becoming Master Dealer Certified in Buy Here, Pay Here. The eligibility criterion, I'm going to talk more about this on Thursday. You have to be in the business for 5 years. You have to be a member in good standing of either NIADA and NABD or both. You have to have a chief compliance officer. We're going to talk about why that's important. You have to be able to affirm that your dealership operational documents have been reviewed by a qualified attorney and that they pass muster. And you have to meet certain historical financial performance criteria as compared to the industry benchmarks. And where do you get the industry benchmarks? You just look in that bag that you were given when you checked in and pull out the used car industry report. NIADA has done a terrific job of putting this together. All the benchmarks are in there, so you'll be able to see what they are and how you compare before you even submit the application. And then, of course, you have to have GAAP basis financial statements. So we're looking for outstanding operators and making them better. We think that it's important the industry have leaders, and with this certification program, you'll be viewed as a leader. We think you'll have better access to the capital markets, and you'll be viewed by your peers as an outstanding, successful Buy Here, Pay Here operator. So if you look at the show for an application, you can either get them from NIADA or at my booth 507 during the show. Well, let's get started. Let's start with Scott Allen. Scott, I'd like you to start by introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about your operation, but more importantly, how did you get into the Buy Here, Pay Here business, and did you know a lot about Buy Here, Pay Here when you started? Scott, tell us about your operation.
Well, I guess I'll start by telling you a little bit about how I got started into the business. First of all, I guess I'm the owner-operator of Autoland in Fort Worth, Texas. We've been in business since 1991. And in 1991, when I was just getting started with the opportunity into the note lot business, I knew nothing. At the time, I went into business with my father and I. We just went around a few people that we knew, a couple of CPAs, a couple of attorneys, a few dealers that were in the area, did some interviews, but practically we do nothing. Right now, currently, I have 7 employees. We're a fairly small operation. It's about a 2-acre dealership. We have about 45 to 55 cars on the lot at any particular time. We sell about 30 to 35 cars a month, and we have a little over $2.5 million in receivables. So.
Very good. So it's fair to say, Scott, you didn't have a wealth of experience when you get into the Buy Here, Pay Here business.
Practically none.
But do you have a wealth of experience now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It continues to grow.
Well, that's good. While we're introducing the other 2 panelists, I'd like to make sure you start thinking of your questions because this is going to be an interactive session. The only bad question is the one that you don't ask. So we're all here to find out those secrets to being more successful. So start formulating your questions. Next up is Kenny Loveless. Kenny, we've known each other for a number of years. Tell us a little bit about your operation, how you got into the business, and were you an expert when you started in Buy Here, Pay Here?
I'm not sure that I'm an expert after having been in the business all these years, Ken, but good afternoon, everybody. Kenny Loveless from Manassas, Virginia. Got started in the business back in 1978 and had the good fortune of fairly young. I had a great business partner, and the two of us had a reconditioning business, and we had an opportunity to be reconditioning cars for a fellow that had quite a bit of experience in the Buy Here, Pay Here business. And he would let us just hang out in his office and just observe and just sort of sit back and watch how he would talk to customers and deal with customers. And so that was sort of our introduction. And then as we developed our reconditioning business a little further, we were able to sort of segue it into the next step. And we started financing cars, and if you want to call it financing. It was a very, very simple business plan back in those days. There was no interest charged. There was I think we were at that time looking for 75% down payment. So if you could say we were in the finance business, but we were financing a very, very small amount. The accounts were kept on 3x5 cards in your mom's little box that she'd keep her recipes in, and that's how we cut our teeth on it. And then my goodness, I can remember when the OneWrite system came out for keeping track of accounts, and you would have thought I just bought the most high-tech computer that ever came down the street. So I've watched it over the years grow, and we've just tried to stay up with the technology, and thanks to people like Ken who have brought the professionalism to the industry and the credibility to the industry. I've seen it go from, oh, you run one of those lots, to now, oh, you've got one of those. So it's been quite a journey.
Well, thanks, Kenny. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Our last panelist today is Dan Reel. And Dan, tell us a little bit about your operation again, how you got started in the business. Did you have any background in Buy Here, Pay Here? A little history on your operation.
Yeah, sure. My history is not quite as deep as Kenny's here. I was born when he started his business. I've been doing it for we've been open for 13 years. I've been at it for 10 years. Prior to being in the business, I was in the Army, and then my father and brother started the business, and I came on board and joined them. So we've been there for 13 years now, and we're in Orwell, Ohio, which is an hour east of Cleveland. My experience before that, though, I did work for a Buy Here, Pay Here dealer as a porter, lot attendant, did tire changes, so I kind of got my bearings there a little bit, and I was lucky for that. We generally keep 100 cars in inventory and sell anywhere from 400 to 500 cars a year. And in the last few years, we've really become a little more on the technology side. We used to not quite the cards, but we were a lot of paper. You have a binder, and you have the names, and you write the receipt out. Where today we're really starting to integrate electronics into the business, and it's a huge advantage. As long as everybody on board is trainable. So.
Excellent. Well, pleasure to have you with us, Dan. I think that for those of you that are in the business out there, you know that there's not a way to do the Buy Here, Pay Here business. There's no secret sauce. There's no magic formula. There's a lot of different ways to do this business. So let's start by talking about your business models, and let's see how your business models differ one from another. Scott, talk about what's the average cost of the vehicles that you sell, how much reconditioning cost do you put in them, and maybe the approximate sales price and down payment you try to get, so we can understand what your business model is.
Sure. My business model, again, is probably going to be on the low end of the scale when it comes to that type Buy Here, Pay Here industry. My average ACV right now is $3,800, which is up from about $800 in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, it would have been closer to $3,000. The average sale price for our vehicles then is anywhere from $69.95 to $89.95, depending on what type of vehicle, miles, how popular the vehicle is, how quickly it may move. What were some of the other things we wanted to cover?
Basically down payment.
Oh.
What kind of down payment, and what's your average payment, and how do you structure your payments?
Okay. Particularly for us, our down payments, we usually try to get 35%. That's what we're looking for, 30 to 35% of the cost of the vehicle as a down payment. In my particular dealership, we will ask as much as 40 and 45 sometimes and defer a small portion of that a down payment to collect it in the first 30 days. That's
average payment?
Average payment for ours is typically, I'd say 70% of our accounts are biweekly, and the average payment is $155.
Okay,
Every
very
2
good,
weeks.
very good. Kenny, tell us about your business model. Same thing, so we can compare it against what Scott just told us.
You know, I think it's interesting, just to back up a tiny bit first. We were very, very much somewhat out of necessity, somewhat out of belief that the buy here, pay here industry was all predicated on down payment. And so for many, many years, we focused entirely on down payment. We were down payment driven all the way. We felt like if you got enough money down, your chances of collecting the balance were going to increase. Well, I think that's one of the huge things that we've seen change over the years. Our average ACV was right in about the $5,500 mark. We have always been higher on reconditioning expenses than what a lot of dealers that I've talked to over the years are. But we also live in a market that demands, I think, a little bit more, and we deal with emissions inspections and some other bureaucratic expenses that other people might not have. I'm going to say 90% of our accounts are biweekly or semi-monthly. We base all of that on the way the individual receives their income. And the goal was always to try to keep that term at under 2 years. So if you think, take your ACV, double it, add $1,000, and then sort of let your payments adjust themselves out accordingly to keep it at a 2-year. And then if you need to budge or need to push it a little bit, go to 2.5, go to 2 3/4, go to 3 years if you're comfortable with it. But double in $1,000, and then keep that term as short as you possibly can, as you feel the customer can handle it.
And what kind of down payment relative to vehicle cost do you try to get, Kenny?
You know, having started this with the comment that we were totally down payment driven, I think we definitely, through education, found over the years that down payment is not as great a predicator of success of the account. And so our average down payments are probably about 18 to 20%.
Okay, and do you do deferred down payments like Scott? Do you take pickup payments?
We did them extensively at one point in time, but we definitely have made a concerted effort to phase out of them. I'd rather just bump the average payment a little tiny bit or just absorb it a different way. If the customer's struggling, this is our opinion on it, if the customer was struggling with getting the down payment together in the first place, what makes you think that they're going to have any success getting that extra chunk of change and come back to you in 2 weeks with a big extra 500 or 700 or $1,000? You're almost setting the stage for a disaster right from day one.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. Dan, tell us a little bit about your business model.
Sure.
And how do they compare to these other gentlemen?
I'm very similar to Scott's, actually. I have about an average of, the ACV is about $3,600. Our average recon will be about $550. We ask for a third down. Year to date, we're about 28% down for what people are putting down. And we are at least getting 25% of those folks are doing a pickup payment.
Pickup payment, okay.
Absolutely. And there is a possibility of a disaster, and it has happened, but generally that success rate on the pickup payment is probably 75, 80%. So we've been rolling with it, and it's worked. As for the monthly payments, we do it monthly with us. We do give the customer an option, but our monthly average is probably about $235 on a monthly payment. And that's about it.
Well, I think, one comment I'd make is that you've heard there's a lot of differences in each of their business model. On deferred down payments, I've often wondered why some people use deferreds and do so well with it, and then others say, well, it just doesn't work for us. And before you dismiss doing a deferred down payment, I think you need to look very closely at your own area, your own business model, the type of customers that you have, because we're in a rising vehicle cost environment, and we just have to get more down or we're taking on more risk. So we have to constantly look at ways to get more from the consumer up front. So before you dismiss not doing a deferred down payment, just realize that many are doing it very successfully, and look at how they're doing it. We can discuss that more, because I do think there's opportunities. The second thing is that when you hear the markup these guys have, or the vehicle cost, or some of the other elements of their model, and they differ, realize that they're operating in different business environments. Some are operating in more rural than urban, different states, different income levels. So it's understandable that their business models will differ. You need to find the model that works best in your local area to be most successful. So there is some assembly required, as we used to say when we were kids, and that's where the rewards really come in. I think that the next thing I want to ask is, none of you started with a wealth of knowledge in Buy Here, Pay Here. None of you indicated that you came out of a family that was doing it, and you just took the reins and there you were. So tell us, where do you get the knowledge? How do you gain the knowledge without having to make trial and error mistakes in this business that are so darn expensive, particularly with the costs that we have today? So Dan, why don't you start with this one? Where do you get the knowledge to become more successful in the business?
Unfortunately, I have had a few trial and errors, as all of us have, if you do buy here, pay here. But a lot of the education and knowledge that I get is through other dealers when I go to association meetings and sit down and talk to people. I'm the president for Ohio for our association, and I've just gotten to know a lot of people that have been doing it since the 70s. And you sit down, and not necessarily even in a 20 group, although those are good. When you just sit down, you're able to put your heads together. So that's where most of my knowledge came from, is through the association.
Very good. So your state association has been an integral part of
it's been
the
huge.
education.
Yeah.
Good, excellent. And Kenny, what about you?
Very, very similar. Through participation in NIADA and VIADA, definitely, and not just. You make the contacts, you make the friends, you get to know the people at the conventions and the trade shows. But then it was having that business card in your pocket, so that when you got back home and you came across a situation 30 days, 60 days, 90 days down the road, you had somebody to call and bounce it off of. So it was definitely, I did not come up with anything creative. I did not reinvent the wheel. I picked the brains of what I felt were the best operators in the associations at that time.
Well, that's why you've been so successful. Don't reinvent the wheel, right, Kenny?
It worked for us anyway.
Scott, tell us a little bit about your experience and how you got your Buy Here, Pay Here knowledge.
Very similar to these gentlemen, I would have to say, and almost every bit of mine has come through the IADAs. I come from Texas, and in Texas we have local IADAs. The cities have their own areas or counties. There's the Fort Worth, the Dallas, the San Antonio, the Houston, all have monthly or semi-monthly, or bi-monthly meetings. So I got involved first at my local association, started going to meetings, meeting the other dealers, finding out all those different ways to skin that cat, and I found there are so many I couldn't even try them all. But I started there on the local level. I got very involved also at the state level with the IADAs, and then again here at the national level. You guys are doing exactly what you should be doing. This is where I got the education from. The networking out there in the hallways, the networking here in the tables, everything that I've learned just about, and again, just like Dan down there, I have nothing against, I love 20 groups. I have not been a member of a 20 group yet, and that's not to say that I won't be, because I think they're extremely valuable. But I will say that I have been connected to my IADAs, and that is what has helped tremendously with education, compliance, and everything, all the facets of this business.
Well, I think that, and I've said this for years, that, you know, education in this business is best obtained, I think, in three ways. One is to become active in your state and local association and become active in NIADA, and then seek out specialized training for whatever segment of the industry that you're operating in. And I think you'll find that those are like three legs on a stool. And without those three things, the stool sometimes gets a little wobbly. So I would really encourage you to look at getting involved in all three elements of that training. Now, I want to come to the Certified Master Dealer program again, because I think that's an important part of the educational process. All of you are CMD retail graduates. Share with us your experience. Has it helped you? What benefits have you seen? And a little bit about your participation in the CMD retail program by NIADA.
I guess I'll start. The fun part for me was Kenny and I went to class together. We were in class together, I guess, about 5 years ago. I think Kenny had already gone through it once before and was coming back a second time around. Again, I was just wanting to further my education, learn more about this business, find out things that maybe I haven't tried or never even heard of to try to further our business. They're in the CMD program, and I like to call it, I joke with Kenny, I called it the compound. It was a maze of, I think it used to be an old stewardess or airline facility where they did the training, and there were a lot of long corridors and hallways. It took almost 3 or 4 days to learn where to get during that process, but it opened my eyes to, and most importantly, I think, all sorts of ways to analyze your business using math, using all sorts of formulas, to measure how well you're doing in certain areas. A lot of things that I had no idea of. I'd never heard of frozen capital. What is that? I didn't understand that at all. That was one of the things that when I got back to my dealership, that I unfroze some of that capital. And so without really spilling all the beans of what it's all about, I think it's very important that you come to those, again, in the CMD program and learn some of those things, because you can apply them in your dealerships immediately the day after you get back. And in fact, there are still things today that I'm going back and beginning to implement at my dealership that I learned during those 4 or 5 days at the CMD training program. I am very, very excited about the new buy here, pay here format. I'm a big fan of Joe. I don't know if Joe's in here, Joe Lascota, who taught the class, extremely vibrant, very, very good educator, makes it fun, makes it educating. I cannot wait till the buy here, pay here segment comes out, and I'll probably be going back to the class again, and I imagine Kenny will probably be there with me. I don't know, but.
Very good, Scott. Great, thank you. Kenny, your experience with CMD, and you know, would you echo Scott's comments?
I would, and some of those financial numbers, I did not have the benefit of a college education. And so to look at the financials, I learned more about reading balance sheets and financial statements in that period than I did in probably the previous 30 years of operating, or 25 years of operating in the business. It was a little bit scary. And for any of you guys out there or girls out there that have not been in school or sat in a classroom for a long time and had to take a test, it was not something I was looking forward to. But you make it, you get through it. And if you go in there with the right approach, it's definitely more structured than a convention or a trade show of this type, where we're all a little more relaxed. You're going there and it's very intense. And Lascota is an excellent educator, an excellent teacher. But you better go in there with the right attitude, that you're going to sit in classroom all day and then go to your room and study all night, because you're going to be taking that test. And you make your way through it, and it's worth it. At the end of the day, you'll benefit. The one area that I went round and round with Joe on, but you can't argue with facts and figures, was the concept of inventory. You talk about learning about frozen capital. Well, how many of us have ever bought a car and we say, oh no, I bought that car right, that's a nice car, that car is going to ring the bell, I just got to give it time. Well, I can show you how that car, I don't care how right you bought it, you'll understand when you come out of there, it's only going to ring the bell if you turn it. And at some point in time, if you haven't turned it, you're losing money because everything's got a cost to it. So.
Very good, Kenny. Dan, would you like to add anything
Sure.
on CMD?
Sure. I'm curious, do we have any in the audience?
Anybody out there? Oh,
Quite,
yeah.
quite
quite
a
a few.
See some good, excellent.
Quite a few. For myself, I love math. I love math. It's my favorite subject. So when I went into the program, I was really happy to learn about the ratios and all the different ways to apply to the business. The inventory turn, I've been doing it myself now 10 years, but I did the CMD, I think it was a March 09 class. And I never even thought of turn. We'd go buy a car at the auction, you sell it in a week, you might sell it in 6 months, and we didn't care. We sat on those things we'd turn rotors 2-3 times sometimes, it seemed like, you know, and
Have a birthday.
and I'm sure all of you guys have done that, but so it was really important to learn about your turn, and that was probably the biggest thing that I took out of there. And also that like they were saying, Joe Lascota, he's a fantastic teacher, but he made me actually open my eyes to my dealership. Like when I came back, I did a walk around, you know, and you'd be amazed. I do it every morning now. When I get there, I'll get out of my car, I'll walk the entire dealership. I got an acre and a half. I'll look at all the tires, make sure they're all aired up, and I never did that before. I mean, I make sure everything's prepped, there's no wrappers on the ground, and you look at things completely differently. You take a little more pride in it. And the marketability also is a pretty important thing. We put the big logo on the window, and you know, it's nice to have your customer see something saying certified as an independent, so that's what I got out of it.
Well, great, Dan, and I'll just comment, as we're putting the curriculum and the instructors together for the Buy Here, Pay Here Master Dealer Certification, it's our intention certainly to involve Joe Lascota, because he is an excellent trainer and an excellent teacher, and certainly we want to draw on his expertise, but we also want to bring in the best of the best, because in the CMD Buy Here, Pay Here program, we want to set the bar very high. We want people to know that when you are Buy Here, Pay Here certified, you're one of the best of the best. You can wear that certification with a great deal of pride, and we want to take outstanding operators and try to help them make it better. We want the peers to view them as outstanding. We want the capital markets to view them as outstanding, and we want the regulators to view them as outstanding. So this is not Buy Here, Pay Here 101 that we're trying to do. We're trying to take the best of the best and make them better, because that's the target that we all need to shoot for, and the instructors and the curriculum will be designed to do that. And then I'm going to take questions from the audience, but I wanted to establish these guys' background. Many of you are retail dealers. Many of you do a lot of retail business, and what I've always wondered is, can you combine retail and Buy Here, Pay Here? Can you do those together successfully? Talk about your experience with that, because with the cost of vehicles today, it's hard to find enough Buy Here, Pay Here vehicles, so maybe we need to be buying a little bit wider in the future and mixing the two. Who'd like to comment on that?
I'll
Dan?
start. I probably only do 15% retail, and the retail that I will do, it's an occasional person that might have $5,000 or $6,000 just buy a car. They're not all that common, and occasionally you'll get a trade-in, you know, an older minivan with a few more miles on it. Somebody comes in and gives you $4,000 for it, but it's hard to mix, in my opinion, retail and Buy Here, Pay Here. I would say, I mean, I'm not an expert at it, but I would say if you're going to do Buy Here, Pay Here, you got to have both feet ready to go in, and you got to do it as Buy Here, Pay Here. It's very, very extremely difficult to put them together. I've noticed, because I tried, because you're going to have a vehicle that you're going to have on the lot that you necessarily can't do a Buy Here, Pay Here on. You might have a $20,000 F-350, and you get, you know, a guy off the road, he wants to put $2,000 down, and you're not in a position to do that unless you have quite a bit of capital. So it's pretty hard to mix, in my opinion.
Okay. Kenny, what would your comment be?
Yeah, I think, like you say, Ken, I think we're probably going to have to figure out ways to do it. I will tell you right now that I didn't do it. I don't advocate it for two reasons. Number one is the credibility, right from Jump Street, is that, well, why is this price on the vehicle if you're financing it as opposed to this price if someone else is assisting me with financing? So you get into a little bit of a difficulty right there, which then lends itself right into the second problem, which becomes the legal side of it. Because now all of a sudden, if you're discounting a vehicle because someone's bringing you cash or you've arranged some outside financing, have you discriminated against that buy here, pay here customer? And I think there's some attorneys that would make an argument that you have. And so I'm not going to say there isn't a way to balance the two, but I think you have to be very, very smart about it and approach it.
Okay, very good. Scott?
Yeah, I would have to probably say the same thing as these gentlemen did. I think it was somewhere around 2001 to 2003 that we decided that we wanted to get into a little bit higher end car or maybe do some retail. And we began to mix those cars in on a little different section of the lot with our buy here, pay here cars. And we did find it very, very challenging trying to run the two completely different types of businesses together in one. Handling both those types of customers in the same place. And the thing that we found is that when we were trying to get things bought, if it was another outside finance deal, for whatever reason, they needed this step, that step, this thing, and after a while we would decide, well, how about we just loan them the money? You know, if we liked the deal that much, then we would end up probably doing that deal ourselves. So, and I agree with Kenny, there is a little bit of a legal thing there with the different types of pricing, especially if you have the buy here, pay here, and you want to mix in the retail. You really have to have, I think in most states and definitely in Texas, one price. So.
Well, I think that, again, we do see operators around the country that have been able to successfully integrate the two. It is challenging, I agree, but it can be done. I think the other thing is that with a rising cost environment and capital still being in relatively short supply, although getting more plentiful, you have to look at ways to finance your operations and retailing some, possibly staying with buy here, pay here, but selling contracts is another very popular thing. The market is excellent for the sale of contracts today, and many people are doing that. So again, be a little creative in how you look at raising capital for your business. It is a capital-intensive business, but that capital can come from many different sources, and I encourage you to think about that as you develop your business plan. How about some questions from the audience? Here's one down here, and if you just speak into that microphone that's right to the right of you, we won't have to repeat the question. Everybody will be able to hear it, sir.
Yeah, Barry Siphon. Do you guys use GPS or cutoff devices?
Great question. GPS or cutoff devices, disabling devices, are you using them, and what are your feelings about them? Who wants to take it first?
I don't use them at all.
Don't use them.
Well, I'll go ahead and say that I'm not currently using them right now, but I'm thinking about it. I haven't used them yet. They've kind of got to a price point now that I think it's much more attractive to me, and I absolutely do believe that it would eliminate some of the loss.
Okay. Kenny?
Do not use them, but like Scott, definitely got to keep your eye on it. I think it is technology that's not going to go away, and I think ultimately we probably will all be using them. But
Yeah, I just want to share that NABD has done 3 national studies on buy here, pay here, on buy here, pay here dealers using payment devices. We've independently compiled all the data. None of it was done or prepared by the device providers. We've looked at over half a million units out there, and all of those studies are available. We've done white papers on them. They're posted on our website. But the important thing is that they definitely provide a benefit to the users. There's no question about it. The price is coming down. They definitely have had a positive impact on collections, on mitigating losses by helping you recover the vehicle quicker, providing a psychological and real deterrent to the consumer who knows that, you know, in the case of GPS, he can run, but he can't hide. In the case of disabling, that he has to honor the terms of his contracts. I encourage you, whether you decide to use them or not, to look at it very closely, particularly if you're new to the business, because mitigating losses is important in the business, and these devices play an important role. If you're still uncertain, download the white papers and the studies and see what others had to say about them. But it's your choice in the end. Whether it fits your model or not is up to you, but clearly there's some great benefits of that technology. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Ashley Mata from RGV, McAllen, Texas. By the way, GPS being a vendor and user for the past 3 years, phenomenal results.
I didn't hear the last statement.
Being a GPS vendor and user for the past 3.5 years, phenomenal results.
Good.
I started off as a collector, ended up putting the GPSs right underneath the dashboards of the car, and now I use them to do, we've got some pretty good receivables.
Has it changed your approach to underwriting?
Yes, sir. The bigger the risk, the greater the return. So, I actually had a question on underwriting and technology. It's a two-part question. My first question is your note buying dynamics. I've got a huge question about that. How do you do it? What do you do?
Note buying.
Not note buying and selling. Do you buy notes and do you sell notes?
Okay.
And what are your schedules on that?
Okay. Do you? What he's asking about is the indirect model. Are you buying contracts from any other dealers, and have you done that in the past? And if so, how do you do that? Anybody want to take that one?
I will simply say, I have not bought, I have not sold, but I wouldn't rule it out on either level.
Okay. Anybody?
I've never bought and I've never sold. 13 years, we use our own money for the most part, and we've never had a need yet to sell it. I would like to look into, obviously, the mechanics of it. How do you put it together to sell it? And I'm sure I'll talk to a few dealers, because we've spoke of it before, my brother and I, but we never got to the point where we wanted to sit down and sell any, but so we don't do it.
Scott, anything?
Yeah, I wouldn't really have more to add to that because I haven't bought or sold. I will say that I did try to buy one time in a foreclosure situation because someone who was going out of business and was taking bids. I did not purchase those, but if I ever did get a related finance company and decided to grow that business, I think I would probably look into it. I have not sold yet for the same reason that these guys have, is the capital is there for me for right now, but it would definitely be something I'd look at if I needed to raise capital.
Let me comment that work with a lot of indirect operator models, and some don't have their own dealership operations at all and work exclusively by buying contracts. And I think this is the perfect time to tell you is that eventually, whether it's the first question or the second question, you're going to ask yourself, is what somebody offering me a fair price for the contracts? Is it fair? So I get called all the time, Ken, I've been offered X, should I take it? Well, I answer it always the same way. What do your metrics say? And oftentimes, the guy on the other end of the phone, what do you mean by metrics? I've got financial statements. Is that what you're talking about? No. I'm talking about what's your static pool or your loss to liquidation analysis say. And they said, well, I don't know, we don't have that. Well, then you're never going to know whether the price that somebody's offering you is fair or not, because if you don't know what your historical losses are, you can't determine what a fair price for your portfolio is. And by the way, you can't raise any money in the capital markets either, because anybody that wants to lend you any money is going to ask you what's your static pool or your loss to liquidation analysis. If you don't know what those two things are, don't leave this week without finding out more about it. And you can talk to other operators, come by my booth. I'll be happy to show you examples of what they are, but make sure that you start developing metrics, because that will answer the question about a fair price. The indirect model is here to stay. It's replacing the capital that we lost from regional banks. So it's an important element of the business, the buy here, pay here business, but you have to understand how to fairly discount and price those transactions. Other questions?
You were talking that you're a big math guy. What software do you use to analyze your metrics?
Okay, so software that you guys are using. Scott, why don't you start? What software system are you using?
I use AutoStar. It does
AutoStar?
have a static pool analysis.
Okay, all right. Kenny?
Finance Express, and for the underwriting, a product called AutoZoom.
Okay. Dan?
We have been, right now, we've been with Frazier for about probably 5 years. Before that, we were all paper and pen. But we've never put any of our account analysis together because we didn't really need to sell it. Now that I'm listening to Ken speak, you know, it would puzzle me, like if I were to put my accounts for sale, like what would I get on the dollar? And you think to yourself, if you're buy here, pay here, and you're going to the auction and buying the car, doing the recon, selling the car, by the time you sell your account, well, you're getting your same money back if you're lucky. So there's a lot of things to look into, but we haven't did any of the metrics.
Very good. I want to take some more questions, but I don't want this panel to end without talking about compliance, because I'd be doing you a disservice if we didn't cover that. I'd like to know what each of you have done to become compliant in your own operation, and what are you going to do in the future with the regulatory environment that we're all facing. Let's start with you, Scott. Well, what have you done in the past? What are you going to do in the future?
Well, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. That's going to keep coming to these conventions and keep staying involved with my local and state association on a regular basis, because things are changing daily. We seem like we have 2 or 3 new forms of paper that we add to our deal jackets on an annual basis coming out of the legislature there in Texas. So I'm going to stay plugged in all the way when it comes to the IADAs. Again, we've worked on our own legislative agenda there in Texas. I have been very active in making marches to Capitol Hill with other dealers to express either our likes or dislikes with certain bills based on how they will impact our businesses. So I would say that to stay compliant and stay on top, just keep going to your local, state, and national meetings and stay plugged in.
Very good. Kenny?
Yeah, the theme of this particular seminar right now is avoiding those potholes, and I will tell you that staying on top of those forms is probably one of the most important things all of us need to do. We had a situation a few years ago where we repossessed a vehicle and had an attorney contact us contesting the repossession, and had gotten their hands on our installment contract and looking through it, and they found a flaw in it. And oh my goodness, talk about paranoia. I had been using that particular form for 5 years probably at that point. And I thought, how in the world did none of us ever catch this? But it can happen. So there's strength in numbers. I definitely have migrated toward getting away from anything customized and going with industry endorsed forms. It's just safety in numbers.
Very good. Dan?
For my dealership, we have, I think, eight full-time people on the staff, and to have for compliance, it's very important to have everybody on the same page. I gained a lot of knowledge, obviously, through our Ohio Association, and a couple years ago, I think, I want to say it was Jim Mitchell told me to assign a compliance officer to my business, and I have. So we have a complete procedure in place. You get your red binders, you train the individual, and you have a compliance officer. And so you have a person actually responsible to follow up, to pay attention to all the new laws, and to go through all the procedures. And that's probably the most important thing that a lot of us could do, is have a compliance officer, somebody in your dealership that's your go-to person. And obviously the underwriting is by far it's the number one killer. That in itself, I don't think there's anything else out there that will put you out of business faster unless you're broke. I mean, just having the right paperwork. And I think right now we have nine or 10 papers for a buy here, pay here deal to be compliant in Ohio. It's quite a handful. So I don't know how, it seems like every year we're also getting another 1 or 2.
Well, I think that, we should all realize that the paperwork burden is growing, but I hope you'll put as number 1 on your to-do list when you leave here to go back and get compliant. We don't know what new regulations lie ahead of us. We are concerned about the possibility of some of these new things happening, but what we do know is that we have a burden on us right now to safeguard identity of your customers and protect that data. We have a responsibility to disclose to the consumer. We have a responsibility to advertise properly. We have a responsibility to do the right things and to treat our consumers fairly. And those are things that are going to continue. We know that part of the new regulatory environment is going to make sure, by looking under your hood, that you're doing these things. So the reality is, go back and get compliant, and you can't be compliant if you don't set a priority in your operation. And as Dan was saying, get a chief compliance officer. Have somebody who's devoted to being keeping on top of the regulatory game. It'll really pay off for you. And have competent professionals advise you. Just because it came out of the computer doesn't mean it's right. It just means it came out of the computer. It's your responsibility to make sure that it's right. So the reality is, you all need to get on top of your compliance game. Other questions?
Ken, can I add one more?
Sure.
Just again, to avoid those potholes, and I think we've all been guilty of this at different times. You have a bad experience with a customer on some level, and you go, well, that'll never happen again. I'll never get beat out of my money that way. So you have a tendency to draw up a new addendum. Okay, effective immediately, everybody's going to start to sign this form going forward. Don't do that. Because nothing is that simple. Because again, if you're all of a sudden you're throwing addendums out there that you're requiring your customers to sign, and it's not referenced back in your buyer's order, and it's not referenced in your retail agreement, much less the fact that it maybe hasn't been approved by your attorney, you're setting yourself up for disaster. So avoid that pothole.
That's a great point. You know, if you think you can ask one of your friends, hey, give me your contracts, it's working for you. Well, it may be working for him, but it doesn't mean it'll be working for you, because his practices are probably not identical to yours. So you better get your own practices interlaced in your documentation and make sure the two sync up to be compliant.
In Ohio, and probably a lot of your states, we have a convention every year as well. And at the last one that we had, we were allowed to bring our paperwork to actually review it with the attorneys. And that's pretty big if you guys are able to get that at your state associations. You take all your paperwork, your deal jacket in, and you just have them, they'll sit down with you and go over it. And that's pretty, if you don't have it, mention it to your execs. That was a pretty important thing for us.
Very good. I'm not hearing any dealers tell me that they're not having a challenging time finding inventory. And I'd like to hear what you guys are doing differently to find the inventory that you need, because I think that's obviously an important part of the business that's changed a lot in the last 12 or 18 months in the auction business anyway. So tell us what you're doing.
With us, we struggle. The way we're struggling is we're just paying more money for the cars than we did 2 and 3 years ago. Obviously, the new car dealers are struggling just as well as we are, so they're not putting those used units. There's a Chevy dealer not too far from me. He'll keep a car with 140,000 miles. 3 years ago, there wasn't anything on his lot with 80,000 miles. So these guys, they're trying to put food on the plate just as well, and it's become a big struggle. So we've just had to pay more money, and I never used to stop on the side of the road and look at a personal owner's vehicle, ever. I stop all the time now. You might get a better deal, but.
Very good.
Yeah, I just do a lot more homework now.
Kenny?
I think, again, one of the important things is identifying which cars work best for you. You want to get away from the idea of just buying a car because you bought it right or because you think you can buy it right. I'd rather pay too much for the right car. What's the old saying in the business? You can't pay too much for a nice car. You can't buy a rough one cheap enough. And that, to take it to the next level, it becomes a matter of identifying, well, what is that right car for you? Not only is it a nice car, but is it the right car? Does it fit your model? Don't try to, just because you think you can buy something at a good price, squeeze that into your system. Put a lot of effort on what turns, what rings the bell for you the quickest.
Scott, anything to add?
The only thing I would add is that I do a lot of the buying myself. I have 2 other porters, one that has been with me for 9 years that I've taken with me for the last 4 or 5 years. And the last couple of years I've turned him loose and we're going to separate places now. So we're able to hit more places where we used to go to maybe 2 or 3 auctions a week. Now we're hitting about 6 or 7 auctions a week. and trying to see more inventory to get more of those cars that fit our profile. Again, we did not change our profile much, although it has come up. We're still buying similarly the cars that we were 4 or 5 years ago. We're paying about $800 more per car for those vehicles. Our recon, of course, has gone up too. I think make sure that we're reconning these cars correctly has been important, but inventory is going to be continuing to be difficult, and in the future foresee that it's going to become even more difficult. So I think that everyone out there should be thinking of different ways and talking to all their friends about different ways of procuring inventory, because I don't see this changing in several years.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen with some of the best operators today is that they're using a lot more technology to source the vehicles that they're looking for. They're not finding them necessarily at their local auctions, so they're using technology to source in a broader spectrum and looking nationally at where to find the vehicles they're looking for. I think that's going to continue, buying from private individuals, using Craigslist, some of the other techniques to find vehicles. However it works best for you is what you need to do, but you need to think outside the box. Unfortunately, as always is the case with these panels, we always run out of time before we run out of questions. But I hope you'll give these guys a great hand, and also, I think we're all going to be here all week. If you don't come by and talk to us, we won't know your questions. So let's give these guys a hand. Thank you.